I was just like, how is this not on the front page of every newspaper in New South Wales? Because those are impossible choices and you have to make them every day when there aren't enough safe beds available.
Today's episode shines a light on an issue that touches every community, yet so often stays hidden behind closed doors: domestic and family violence. In this episode, we're honoured to be joined by Annabelle Daniel OAM, CEO of Women's Community Shelters, a network of crisis accommodation shelters and services providing safety, support and hope for women and children facing domestic and family violence and homelessness in New South Wales. Over the past decade, Annabelle has worked alongside local communities, governments and frontline organisations to open 11 women's shelters, establish transitional homes and lead preventative programs tackling these critical social issues. She also chairs Domestic Violence New South Wales, sits on the New South Wales Coercive Control Implementation and Evaluation Task Force, and brings decades of leadership from both the frontline and policy spheres. This will be a powerful, compassionate and necessary conversation, and one you won't want to miss. A quick note before we begin. This episode of You Think discusses themes of domestic and family violence, women's safety and child vulnerability. If you or someone you know needs support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT or 1-800-737-732 for free, confidential help 24 hours a day.
You Think is sponsored by Vulvali, a living experience where you can work, learn, play and connect. Visit vulvali.com.au.
Welcome, Annabelle.
Thank you.
I have the privilege of knowing about your work through my work as an educator. And I was at a school in the Castle Hill area and we made it part of our transition program for Year 10 that every boy learn about the domestic violence, family violence and the work that the women's community shelters do. And we were part of what they called the walk the talk process. And we used to make these beautiful, every boy made a little toiletry bag themselves. They had to make them and then they filled them up with all the toiletries and they would give them to you or your shelter at the end of that process. And I remember thinking how important that process was, that we were educating through action. And then we also did a lot of the, we went down and we walked with the white ribbon. And then so I know a wonderful lady that works with you called Roxanne Leopardi.
Yes.
And Roxanne and I were colleagues. And she very much keeps the pedal on the metal there in terms of, advocating and educating because it's such an important issue. So welcome and thank you for making the time. I know you're super busy. I follow you on LinkedIn and you're crazy. Like you're doing such an amazing job out there.
Look, as I said, it's not just me, it's my team as well. But we like getting things done. We prioritise action.
All right, a woman after my own heart. Yes, multitasking in the right way.
That's what we try to do.
Yeah. So today is a fairly serious topic, but one that we need to be able to talk about more, as you said, authentically, transparently, because I think when we go quiet on topics like this, it breeds misinformation and also a little bit of naivety and ignorance about the processes involved and the impacts of violence, whether it's on a woman, a child or a family. But before we delve right into that, and it's going to be a pretty deep topic, let's start with you because I think people need to know who you are, Annabelle.
I always find it really difficult to talk about myself, but I'm in this work because it is meaningful. I also have lived expertise myself, although I don't often foreground that because I was an expert and working in spaces like domestic and family violence and allied fields well before that. But it's really important to me because fundamentally it's about the meaning of life. I'm doing work trying to make the world a little bit better for other people. And if that's not the meaning of life, I don't know what is. And so I derive an enormous amount of meaning and satisfaction from the work that I do every day. It might surprise people, but I'm actually an optimist. I believe domestic and family violence is a solvable problem. And I think there are tangible things that all of us can do to make a difference in this field.
I think that about everything, actually. The more education, the less we have poverty, the less we have food waste, the less we have people resorting to violence out of either frustration, anger, or mismanaged well-being, like mental well-being. But I'm not the expert, so I'm going to really rely on you to educate us. So you are the CEO of the Women's Community Shelter. Can you tell our listeners about that, what it is and how it started?
Yes. So Women's Community Shelters has been around since 2011, and it was created by a founding board. And one of our amazing founders, Peter Hunt, had started a little bit earlier in this kind of work. So he was actually an investment banker, and you might not immediately think that investment bankers have much to do with women's homelessness or domestic and family violence. But he and his wife, Ellie, moved into a new place in Manly in 2008. And you know, they'd done pretty well from his work, and they'd set up a private family foundation, and so they'd moved into this new home. And Ellie started volunteering at the local community centre there. And when she started volunteering, she very quickly found that there were more than 300 women per year that were approaching that service looking for a safe place to go, and there was nowhere for them. A lot of them were women who didn't have dependent children with them, and that service had been asking state and federal government funding to set up a shelter for about 20 years. Like they had known that there was one needed in the area, but they'd kept being knocked back.
So 300 women in a year, if you can't service those women, where do they go?
Well, they make all kinds of alternative unsafe arrangements. They might be sleeping in parks, they might be sleeping in cars, they might be moving around on public transport at night, staying awake because it's very unsafe for women to be out in public, asleep at night time. Or they might be in relationships that are unsafe for them.
So they return to an unsafe...
Yes, they might, or they might need to shack up with someone essentially to be protected.
And that puts them again at risk.
Exactly. So what Ellie very quickly saw was that something needed to happen. And so she went home to Peter one night and said, damn it, we're going to start a shelter ourselves. We're going to do this. And so she drew together a steering committee from the local community, from people that she knew and people from Rotary clubs and service clubs and people from the local council. And they researched how to do it and developed a plan to set up a shelter. And their family foundation agreed to underwrite the costs for a couple of years to help it get off the ground.
Which would have been a huge investment?
Yeah, it was a significant investment. It costs about back then it was about $350,000, $400,000 a year to run a shelter, and about 80% of that is the operating costs, so the staffing. But they decided they wanted to do that and then bring on board local support and fundraising. And so pretty shortly afterwards, they got that up and running. And that service is still going. It's now known as the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter.
So I did read it was the inaugural.
Yes,
yes,
it was
an inaugural.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful.
Yes. And so then after that, Peter and Ellie thought, well, if this worked in this community, might there be other communities around New South Wales who also had an interest in setting up a shelter if we provided them with the right support? And so he drew some colleagues together, founding board members, and they formed Women's Community Shelters. And they did some research and found that, and this still holds true today, it's a staggering figure, more than 1 in 2 women who seek safe crisis accommodation across Australia are turned away every day. And so that was the basis of the need. Now, I had been working at the time. I'd taken a break from a public service career. I'd also just got divorced and took on a city mortgage on my own. And I had moved out of the public service because a friend of mine said there's a manager position at Elsie Women's Refuge, which was the oldest one in Australia. It was established by Anne Summers in the 1970s. And my friend had said, I think this work will really resonate with you. And so I took over that position and had an incredible team that was supporting women and children. And basically what you could see in working in that sort of position was that every single bit of discrimination that women and children face, every kind of abuse you can think of, was right there in your face. You know, literally my office was on one side of the building, there's a corridor, the kids are running up and down, there's a playground out the back, the bedrooms are upstairs, and across from me is the office where these incredible caseworkers are sitting with the women and children who are telling their stories. So you don't get the option to look away. And one of the things that just outraged me so quickly was that the minute that we had a vacancy and had supported a woman and her children move in to a new home, like we'd found them an affordable place to go, or we'd found them housing, there was like at least another 2 or 3 calls that desperately wanted that room that had just become available.
And so it must put you and anyone who's in that role of managing the allocation in great duress, because you have to select the family that goes into that very, very, as you said, rare spot that pops up, or availability.
Yeah, can I tell you the story of a choice that I had to make one day?
Yeah. Am I going to cry? Do I need a tissue?
Probably.
Okay.
Because it's a real flashpoint for me, because it was at that moment, and this was only when I was probably only a couple of months into the job. I'd gone away for a meeting in the morning. We'd supported a family to pack all of their things into one of the utes that we had. We had these utes that we used to help people move with, and we'd taken them out to their new home. We'd stood on the balcony of the refuge and waved them off, and that's always the best moment, right? And so my team had gone upstairs, remade the bed with new linen, put beautiful cushions and those welcome packs on and everything, and we were going to open the phone lines at 9 o'clock the next morning. And I'd been out to a meeting and I came back at about 11, I think it was. And a couple of my caseworkers came towards me and they had 3 clipboards. And on each one of those clipboards, like literally they met me at the front door with these 3 clipboards, and it was like, right, you need to make that decision. And on the first clipboard, it was the local police station at Glebe had rung up, and they had a 22-year-old Aboriginal mum who was down at the police station. She'd been up to the hospital and they'd patched her up, but she was in a bad way. She had 3 kids with her, and they were looking for a safe place for her to go because she couldn't go home. The second phone call was from the social worker at the same hospital saying, I've got a mum in maternity ward. She's given birth to premature twins and they've been here for 4 weeks. But there's domestic violence in the home. If you can't give her a safe place, we're going to have to take the babies away from her and give them to child protection. And the third call was a mum who'd rung herself, and she had been in the car over the weekend with 2 teenage children, like a boy and a girl, 15 and 13. And they'd slept in the car all weekend, and she said, I've got $30 to my name. I will put that in petrol in the car if I can drive up, and you can give me that room because there's nothing here. And so I was just like, how is this not on the front page of every newspaper in New South Wales? Because those are impossible choices and you have to make them every day when there aren't enough safe beds available. And I won't keep you in suspense. I'll tell you what we did, because people are always like, well, how did you choose? Like, what did you do? And the reality is that in this kind of work, you are pulling off minor miracles every day to support people. And we were able to bring in the young mum with the premature twins because we decided that she was the most at risk in these circumstances. Those babies needed to stay with their mum. And what we also did is we knew that we had another bed that was probably coming up in a couple of days because we were working on housing for someone who was leaving. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to bring the young Aboriginal mum into a motel nearby and support her by visiting her for the next couple of days before she came in. And then we also hit the phones and rang around the shelters that we knew down south and said, have you got anything that's come up today that hasn't gone on a vacancy list? And luckily there was one. And so we were able to direct the mum in Wollongong with her kids towards something closer. But that's an everyday kind of
dynamic
piece of magic and miracle that you're pulling off. And for me, that was just like, I don't know how we are not outraged as a nation about this.
I know, and because we're, I've seen that we often put things on the paper about people who have been murdered, and there are a lot of campaigns. I know Mamma Mia does the one, her name was or is, and I think that's really important because naming people is so important. But we don't do enough, as you said, about what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And that's what's happening more. We're not devaluing those who have lost their life. No way would I be saying that. But what we're saying is that every day there are people at huge amounts of risk to their well-being, without food, without shelter, without, sense of safety. And we don't put that in the paper. We just put the end result. But you said that you're working towards hopefully minimising the the result of death for women and for children. But also you're hoping that this will be an opportunity to really educate us about what we can do to make more spaces available, support the organisations that are already in existence and ones that need to be in existence in terms of support. So the women's community shelters, you said there's about 11 and possibly 12 is about to open. You've got one about to open in Liverpool. That's exciting. So you have them spread all over New South Wales?
We have them, they're to a large part in Greater Sydney at the moment. We have one about 4.5 hours north as well. And we're looking at expanding into regional areas. What it's really about for us, and building on our knowledge, so we support communities with the project management to help a shelter get up and on its feet and all of those sorts of things. We provide funding. We provide, the policies and procedures that you need to run a shelter on a day-to-day basis and keep women safe. We help find staff, and we join all of the shelters together in a family so that people can, so that people in the shelters draw strength from each other.
Because I'm sure that one of the things you need to do is look after the people who look after those
100%
who are seeking your help. Yes, yeah, I can only imagine.
And we call it's actually a legitimate work health and safety risk. We call it vicarious trauma. Listening to other people's stories, particularly when they're talking about some of the toughest moments of their lives, has a psychological impact. And we need to address that professionally.
Yeah, because otherwise you can become desensitised.
Yes.
And that's the worst. And I actually think that some of what's happening in this world is that we have become a little bit desensitised, and also we don't want to hear it. It's like see no evil, hear no evil, because I was talking to a few people and I was saying that I was going to be interviewing you this week, and they still have a limited knowledge of what really domestic violence is. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit, because I think two things I'd love to talk about next is what is domestic and family violence, but also the processes of when somebody does come, what's their process look like in terms of their transition back into a safe space. But let's start with a little bit more about what is domestic violence.
Yeah, look, I think it's really good to unpack this a little bit, because historically I think when people think about what domestic and family violence is, they think it's about bruises and black eyes and physical abuse. And what we know about it now is, and in fact what's recently become criminalised in New South Wales, is actually the patterns that sit behind most domestic and family violence, which is called coercive control. And basically coercive control is a pattern of having power over somebody so that they comply with your wishes. So keeping them walking on eggshells, keeping them in fear, making them constantly focus on what you want them to do or what they think should be done. And that can form a pattern of behaviours which is not just about physical violence, although quite often there's the threat of physical violence that comes at some point. And so that might be, firstly, it's about isolating you quite often, snipping off your social connections, taking you physically away from the people and friends that you have by moving you somewhere potentially. Or it could be about saying things like, really don't like it when you hang out with your best friend Sally, she's not a good influence on you. And then subtly making it difficult every time that you see her.
So that sense of guilt,
yes,
and worry.
sort of really just snipping away at those threads, or, oh gosh, your mother's over here again. She really cramps our style when she comes over. Does she have to be over every week? And over time, what that does is it isolates somebody from supportive relationships and brings somebody even more under an abuser's control.
So that also includes financial control or misuse, in that person who is being controlled doesn't have their own credit card or their own bank account, or has to account for every dollar that they spend. And that can be quite, to me, that would sound stressful.
Yeah, it's enormously stressful. Financial abuse is actually really quite big, and a lot bigger than a lot of people realise. It can include things like forcing somebody to work as well, or forcing them to work more hours than they really have capacity for. It can be around things like taking all of their income. It can be about somebody within a relationship putting all of the assets in their own name and putting all the debt in their partner's name to kind of keep them tethered to a relationship. It can be things like outright fraud, like making somebody a director of a company and then doing fraudulent things with that company, and then that person's equally liable as any other director for the resultant loss.
And so they feel tied, don't they?
Very much so. It's and that's financial abuse. We often see a big part in abusive relationships in higher socioeconomic backgrounds as well. But we also see it all across the spectrum, and including in culturally and linguistically diverse groups where there might, for example, be cultural expectations around dowry payments and how those are used and appropriated and used as leverage.
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because when, you talk about domestic violence or family violence in general, most people get that image, or they immediately bring up low socioeconomic areas, because they equate, and rightfully so in some ways, poverty to violence and the cyclical nature of that in families. But that's not the case.
No, it's absolutely not the case. And again, when I was managing a shelter myself, at one point in the shelter we had a doctor, a lawyer, a concert pianist, and an ophthalmologist at the same time.
So very educated, able to look after themselves in terms of financially, but have come because they have been put in their own safety or their own well-being is
exactly right,
compromised.
And in the vast majority of those cases, that was about psychological abuse. Really, really intense threats and degradation and put downs. Lots and lots of financial control. And often that's very, very tough, because if you have situations where children are in private schools and there's large mortgages and there's the image of success that gets projected on the outside, there's often a fair amount of shame for people in admitting that things are not okay and that abuse is going on behind closed doors.
And also, I would dare say, it's not even just, the shame would be huge, but also I don't know what to do, like where to go. And also, what if I do leave and I can't... I'm not going to say who the person was, but I had somebody who I knew who left and was not able to get back into their own home. And so they left and could not get back into their own home. So no clothing, no credit cards. They just walked out of, fear. 6 months it took for the courts to get them access back into the home. And by that stage, he had burnt everything, as in rage, So she didn't get anything anyway. But the point is, there was this... I don't know what to do. She didn't, but out of quick desperation, walked for her own safety. And so there's a little bit of, if I do leave, I could go with nothing, and then I can't feed my kids, or I don't have control of my own life. So sometimes I feel it could even be, that fear of helplessness.
And I think you've answered a really powerful question which people often ask, which is, why doesn't she leave? And the answer is for all of those reasons. If you don't have access to your own money because you've been financially controlled, if your kids, for example, have particular needs or commitments, like your kid might need a speech pathology appointment once a week, or they might be in a special school, or, they might have their own commitments or their own issues, or if you don't have, if you don't have income that you can easily put your hand into a bank account to feed your kids tomorrow and the next day and find somewhere else to live, then yes, those questions are very live and very real.
So Talk me through a process then. Someone comes to one of your shelters. How long can they stay at a community shelter?
Generally speaking, they stay around about 3 months.
Okay.
So that's about the average stay. And we will always have people who might have stronger social networks to fall back on or connections, and their crisis might be a little bit shorter. So we spend a couple of weeks getting them back on their feet, and then they're back into their, they've arranged living arrangements and everything's getting back on track again. Sometimes we support people who have much more complex things going on. They might have police and justice matters or extended family law matters. They might have immigration issues, which can really complicate things.
I can only imagine.
Visa status is just a hugely complex area. So if those issues are in play, then we might need to support somebody a little bit longer. But we don't work with a hard and fast timeline because, if somebody's working closely with us, we'll support them until they're ready to take the next step.
And so they come to the shelter and they've got a bed and some toiletry, especially if they come. And do a lot of people come with not a lot of things?
It's very dependent. Sometimes the exit's a little bit planned and they've got some things with them because they've been working with the caseworkers ahead of time to be able to leave. But sometimes it is very immediate, particularly if police are wanting to place somebody in a shelter.
So sometimes
safely.
they come with nothing, like they don't have pyjamas, they don't have any toiletries.
That's right.
And so let's go to what we can do now. Let's educate and encourage people to be more active in their local communities, especially if there's a shelter, or to help maybe get a shelter going in their local communities or shires, as we call them. So let's start with the education. What do we need to know, Annabelle, that will make a difference to me just getting up in the morning and knowing that there's somebody else in need? What do I need to know?
I think a lot of it is about being alert to the signs when people talk to you. There's a role that we can all play to combat abuse, and that is, if I think there's a lot of trusting a gut feel about what things are going on for our friends, our co-workers, our colleagues. If
Something they say,
I always think one of the biggest signs that I watch for, or if someone says they're worried about a family member or a friend, is if that person is withdrawing and making themselves smaller and isolating themselves from the people and the things that they used to love and take part in. If it seems like their joy is being, and their spark is being extracted from them, those are sort of the little things that make me worry about what's going on for them if they're in a relationship.
So an early intervention can make a huge difference for that person.
It can, and it doesn't have to be like I think a lot of people are really worried about saying the wrong thing. And if you're worried about someone, the simplest thing you can say is, "Hey, I'm worried about you. Is everything okay?" And they might brush it off and they might go, "Oh yeah, everything's fine." But even if they do that, and you might feel mildly embarrassed by that, you've planted a seed with them that if something is not okay, that you are probably a safe person to come and talk to. And so I always think just being alert to the signs of what it can look like if somebody's in an abusive relationship, that's a very helpful skill to have in your back pocket. The other thing we can all do in terms of local communities and local shelters that we can support, I love to talk in terms of your time, your treasure, or your talent, right? So if you've got time to volunteer, then shelters often have opportunities for volunteers. We have local community boards on our shelters who are amazing volunteers, and we also have people who might give their talent in the sense of they might have a particular cooking skill, or they might teach yoga, they might be a hairdresser, they might have skills with kids or speech pathology or other kinds of art therapy. Those can be valuable donated skills for shelters.
So you're saying if somebody's very good at cooking, they could come and teach
Yes,
how to cook,
absolutely.
or they could come and help cook. You're saying, in terms of helping out with the food reproduction within the shelters? Okay.
Yeah, all of those things can be really helpful. So time, treasure and talent. Obviously, a lot of shelters are, we're never funded to the need. As I said, every time we talk about domestic and family violence, more women put up their hands for help. And that means that's why, we can open shelters, and every time I've done that over the last 12 years, we've had a waiting list before we even open the doors. People try to say, oh, well, as soon as you're open, let me know because I need to leave, which says people won't leave unless they know there's a safe place to go.
Correct.
So helping to open more shelters and safe housing is absolutely critical.
So I read something, and you will know because you've probably got your finger on the pulse for statistics, but there was something around the 170,000 beds a night are needed across Australia annually.
I think that's New South Wales, actually.
Oh, it's New South Wales.
Because that makes me feel like it's a statistic that I've talked about, which is there are more refuges being established across New South Wales. It's a program that's happening, but it's taking a long time. And we know that with every night that goes past, there are people who are in substandard motels, or they're couch surfing with friends, or they're sleeping rough, or they're sleeping in their cars, which is why having safe beds with support and community love wrapped around them is so important.
And your, in terms of the actual funding, do you have some funding from the government, and then you must rely heavily on beneficiaries in terms of philanthropic type of donations, and then the general community?
Yeah. So Women's Community Shelters, so my organisation, the vast majority of the work that we do to establish and open new shelters and safe houses is supported by donations and philanthropy. We have some money from the New South Wales State Government, which I funnel through to the shelters for their operating costs, because that's where government money belongs. It's in the shelters and doing the frontline work, supporting women and children. But each shelter receives some funding. They also do community fundraising, and they also receive philanthropic donations as well. So it's a collaborative effort for shelters to operate them.
Yeah, and it would be costly because you're turning over, as you said, linen, food, toiletries, toys for little children. You would have witnessed some really sad stories, and I'm assuming that the children have it has quite a massive impact for younger people, teenagers and children. Do you want to share a story, obviously keeping their anonymity, but of something where it you saw that impact on the family, particularly for young people?
Yeah, I can. And look, and I think for me, one of the things though, and I think while I wouldn't, domestic and family violence has long-term impacts on children, but children are also incredibly resilient. And I think one of the best things for me about these services is often when children come in, they don't know where they're going, they're a little bit scared, there are other people around, they kind of come in and their shoulders are all hunched up and their eyes are wide and they're like, where am I? What's this about? And if we're doing our job properly in the shelter, which we do because we have special child support workers that are there to support children specifically, within 2 days, they're back to being kids, right? They're running up and down the hallway. They're, fighting with their brother or their sister. They're clambering all over the play stuff in the backyard and, yelling and screaming and making it hard to hear on the phone. They're back to being kids. And I think that is the best bit of what we get to see. And I think about, one of the stories that always stays with me was there was a 5-year-old boy who came in with his mum into one of our shelters, and she had come from overseas, from Southeast Asia. She had married and come over here, and it was all sort of lots of glitzy promises about the life and the future that would happen in Australia. And she came here and she was basically turned into a domestic slave. She was literally locked in a room of the house and only allowed out when he allowed her out. And she was allowed within a perimeter zone, and he had tracked her to the shopping centre and the local school, put a tracking device in the car and jailbroken her phone so that he could see every communication that was happening. And then basically when she got home, she was allowed in this area locked in with the son. And so they made it out via a connection with a multicultural worker at a local service who placed her in one of our shelters. And they had arrived at the end of a school term, and quite often what we do is we have we do it every school holidays. The child support workers who support the kids have a program where they do fun stuff, kid stuff, take them to the zoo or take them up to the shopping centre where there are activities or other things. And the child support worker had arranged a movie day and had taken them up to the cinemas. And the little boy came back to the shelter and he was running around and he was saying, I saw the biggest TV in the world. The biggest TV in the world. And like those are the moments where you just go, okay, wow. You know, like that is...
His little world was blown open.
Exactly. This is a kid who's lived for 5 years in an incredibly limited existence. And to be able to not just start the healing journey for him, but to expand his mind with joy is the stuff that keeps you going in this work.
Because now he has hope, doesn't he? He has a spark of that innocence of child, back in him. And that must make you feel like, okay, what we're doing is, as you said before, meaningful.
Yeah. And
That's the most important thing.
And it's not just about, you can deal with all of these survival and safety needs down the bottom, but kids need all this stuff up the top as well. They need play. They need to feel joy. They need to feel... if they haven't got safety, then they can't access any of that.
And I'm sure that there are educational programs. I was involved, I told you, in the one that we do, but I am going to say this openly, that I think all schools should actually have programs where they educate around domestic and family violence and have them also do acts of service, because it is through acts of service that you truly understand empathy.
Yep.
Otherwise, we sit in a world of sympathy, which is, I'm sorry for someone's loss or whatever, but we don't truly really feel it. So we have to walk, through those people's shoes somehow, whether we're doing something. And so do you have educational programs that the women's community shelters are associated with? Yeah,
look, the Walk the Talk program is just like, it is the thing that gives me hope, because like a lot of the work that we've done, when we first started, we thought we were establishing new crisis shelters in partnership with communities, which were going to provide this incredibly important crisis response. And they do. They provide crisis, recovery, healing, housing, all of those great things. But what we quickly figured out when we started working with amazing people in local communities was that you're actually taking a whole community on a journey of understanding what domestic and family violence is and how it creates homelessness and how we can respond to that. Because we would get reach outs from the local preschool would say, can you come and talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in starting this shelter, and can we put a box out to collect some canned goods that we could give for the pantry? Or you'd get, the local aged care facility that would say, come and do a talk for us. And, and the amazing women and men would pass around a hat and they'd all put like $5 notes in it to donate. Or the Rotary Club will say, okay, how can we get stuck into a local project? And so you're building this understanding, and Walk the Talk really grew out of that, which was when one of our shelter board members, Danielle Miller, who I work really closely with, she's an educator in this space in respectful relationships, and she went to talk to the Year 10 boys at Oak Hill College and gave them such an inspirational discussion about what that shelter, the Sanctuary, is and does, that they took on this project of creating these welcome packs for the women and children, went out and bought the things, fundraised, put it all together, gave them to the shelter. And, they put these little cards inside that said, this is from the boys at Oak Hill College. We hope you feel safe here and we've got your back. And it just gives me the chills every time I think about that, because that's the change that we want to see in the world.
But in doing so, those boys now might be educated about the signs. You talked about looking out for the signs. They may see something at home or in a extended family situation that might trigger to say to somebody else, I'm worried about.
Yes.
And you, as you said, it's not always the obvious stuff of the, and also culturally, they might have thought it's okay if that's what granddad and grandmother behaved, and now my parents behave that way, but it's not okay. Specifically when we talk about coercive control.
Yes.
And so we need to break cycles.
Yep.
So not only are we educating the generation, but we're also helping them to break the cycle, because they're going to be able to be the ones that step up. And I actually find this current generation very vocal about things like coercive control and consent and respectful relationships, more than my generation or the one in between, I should say.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit old now, Annabelle. So,
You and me both.
so there is like a whole other generation in between. But what I've found is, as the generations have evolved, as an educator, I noticed how much more vocal they were and more proactive. And so that's down to things such as you said, as Daniel Miller's Walk the Talk, or in this case, your campaigns, that you're doing and you're actively campaigning. I just recently saw the campaign on TV with the sports people, the Australian sports people, and their message about all men can make a difference, not just the ones that are involved. And I think there is something to say about education, but I actually wanted to correct that. And I wanted to say it's not just all men. Everyone can stop this. So the campaign was wonderful, but they were singling out a generation again or a gender. And I think the campaign should be everyone can stop this. Everyone has a voice.
I think that's exactly right. I think we can all do something. And I think one of the really positive things we've seen out of initiatives like Walk the Talk and about getting young men as well as young women involved in this is often a really confusing space for young men, particularly the generation that's going through high school now and is in their early 20s. They've grown up around messages and around messaging where girls functionally look equal in our public discourse. And to a large extent, I think there's a level of confusion about what the right thing to say or do is. How do I navigate all of this? And I think giving people practical ways to make a contribution, giving people practical actions that they can undertake, exactly as you say, this service learning is incredibly important because it's even if you don't know the right thing to say or think, you can still do something good.
And it's not just at education level. I would say let's all do it. Every organisation, every small business, every big business, every school, every whatever you are. If you're a 1 or a 10 or 100, why don't you do something small? As you said, it could just be donations. It could be a collection that you've collected financially, or it could be a drive where you make awareness and you collect things that needed. Those shelters, the more we give, the less they take from the funding that's needed for the people, as you said, to staff it, like your social workers and the cooks that come in and provide healthy, nutritious meals, and those who need to medical, people that are coming in and are advising and helping you to get to the right services. So my wonderful daughter-in-law is in social work, and, I worry about her well-being at times because she's dealing with all that conflict all the time. And so we are equally investing in the carers of those who need to be cared for in all of this.
And that's a really important thing as well because, look, you are working with people who have often experienced the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and quite often when people are talking about their stories, this has gone on for a long time.
Correct. It's not a one-off.
No. It has been a pattern of behaviour, which we now understand domestic and family violence to be, as opposed to just one-off incidents. If you've been living in fear and if you've been hypervigilant and if you've been walking on eggshells for years or decades, undoing that actually takes a long time. And supporting somebody to heal is a professional job.
So at the end of this, if you had to give us some advice, 3 things we can do immediately, as you said, under those, I love that, time, treasure and talent. What are 3 things we can do right now as individuals? And then what's the future hold for community women's shelters? But let's start with the 3 things.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is Google coercive control and understand what it is and those.
So educate.
Yes, educate yourself, understand. Because in New South Wales particularly, coercive control is illegal between intimate partners now. So,
and Queensland as well?
Yes, it's just been criminalised. It came into effect at the end of May.
Great.
So learning about what coercive control is, educate. The second thing I would say is find out what your local domestic and family violence service is and then what do they need. And that's a really powerful thing because I think in a world that feels big and out of control and when you're dealing with an issue that feels too big for any one person to solve, the answer is start local. So reach out near you and find out, what your local domestic and family violence service is and what might they need. And I say the third thing is, Well, it would be remiss of me not to mention we're a couple of days out from the end of the financial year, and therefore services like mine, like women's community shelters, need donations to be able to create more safe housing. So if what people are interested in, and that's where their values lie, then consider supporting an organisation financially.
And $1 can go a long way.
It absolutely can. It absolutely can. If I was to break that down for you, even $10 puts credit on a phone card for somebody to be able to make phone calls to secure, another rental property, or to call Centrelink, or to call the children's school.
Yeah, you forget about those little things, like not being able
Very
to put
important.
petrol in a car.
Exactly.
Not being able to call because you don't have enough money to put phone credit on. And as you said, even buying the basics so that the person can actually brush their hair, wash their teeth. I mean, I think those things they're just things I do.
Yeah.
I take for granted. And so that $10 can make a huge difference.
Absolutely can. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the future?
What's the future? Look, I would ideally love to create an Australia where I can close all our shelters down again, because fundamentally that's what we're here to do. If I don't have my eye on solving domestic and family violence in Australia, I've got my eye on the wrong thing. But unless and until that day happens, we need to be able to respond to people who need our help. And so I will continue working with local communities and other amazing partners to create new shelters and safe housing for women and children.
I was thinking, we talk a lot about women who come with families and children because they leave homes that are unsafe. But you touched on it briefly, and you sort of mentioned your own story, divorcing, having to get a mortgage again in Sydney, dare I say. That in itself scares most people. But there is an epidemic of homelessness in women over 50. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And so you must be looking after them as well?
Yes, we are. And quite often women who become homeless over the age of 50, 55 do so because of a lot of that structural inequity that's happened beforehand. They quite often they will have experienced death or divorce from a partner. They may have experienced domestic and family violence. Plus, we're also in an incredibly overheated property market at the moment. Finding an affordable rental as a single person is very, very difficult. And women generally don't have the same earning capacity as men. They might have had a broken career history, or they might have worked casually or part-time.
Is much lower.
Exactly right. They might not have the same super balance. They may have taken time out of the workforce to care for relatives or elderly parents. And so their ability to compete in an overheated rental market also creates a huge risk of homelessness. So we also have 4 large-scale transitional housing projects for women over 55 to provide those affordable rentals.
And thank God, because just even looking at the loan application paperwork today, it's complicated. They want, everything from you. And if you haven't had a regular income, stability, they're not going to invest in you. They're not going to give you that little bit of a heads up to go, okay, we'll give you something to put a deposit on, and I know that you're and look, I'm in my early 50s. I've got a few years left in me. I can work. But it's also there is a generational discrimination about women in their 50s not being able to handle the workload. I'd like to put it out there. I think we're fairly resilient and sturdy type of people because we have worked through different periods of economical and social challenges. So thank God that there are places that women can go to and restart. Well, thank you so much for sharing. You have highlighted for me 2 very important things. One is that we need to educate ourselves. But you said start by just getting the basic facts right. What is coercive control? And also educating our family members and our friends. So if somebody says something that's a misconception, hold them accountable to that. But also act. There's my 2, educate and act.
Yep.
Get out there, give of your time if you can, donate in the financial year, regardless. Local is best. Start local because that's where it's most needed. And then that will have the ripple effect we hope.
Look, I think if you've taken those messages, I'm really happy. That's great.
And I wish you all the best. And look out because Rose is in your corner.
Amazing.
And I'm about to, at the end of the year, I'm off on an adventure with a whole bunch of women. And we're going to make the Women's Community Shelter our charity.
Oh,
so as we
fantastic.
walk, we're going to donate. For every kilometre we walk, we're going to raise money for the local Castle Hill shelter.
Amazing.
So we just want to let you know that. And that's our commitment to you.
Thank you. That is really incredible. That is the power of doing something.
Yeah, everybody. I ask everybody, just do something today
That's fabulous.
to make a difference. Thank
you.